This small component that's part of the chapter on form is included in case you're not very comfortable with the topic of rhyme. First, let's start with a poem, and then we'll discuss what rhyme is and how it's used. Here's a nonsense poem by the Victorian poet Edward Lear from the larger work The Owl and the Pussycat. The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note. The owl looked up to the stars above and sang to a small guitar, "What a lovely pussy! Oh, pussy, my love, what a beautiful pussy you are, you are, you are! What a beautiful pussy you are!" In this poem, we can hear the patterns of stress and unstress, that is, those poetic feet. And we could catalog how many feet are in each line. That's one of the elements of form. But there's another element that is common, although not universal, in English poetry, and that is the element of rhyme. Rhyme is a phenomenon that occurs when two phonemes, or spoken syllables, have the same vowel sound and enough of the same consonants around those vowels to convince us that they really do sound alike. The first line of this poem ends with the word sea. The second line ends with the word boat. Sea, boat. Those words don't have the same vowel sounds, and they certainly don't have any of the same consonant sounds either, so they don't rhyme. But if I look down to the fourth line, I see that it ends with the word note. Boat, note. They both use the long O and the T sound at the end. So lines 2 and 4 have the same rhyme. Let's go back and look at lines 1 and 3. See, money. You could think that perhaps those two lines don't rhyme because the accented syllable see and the accented part of money doesn't rhyme. But if you look more carefully, you'll see the E sound is at the end of money in an unaccented syllable. So it would be fair enough to say that lines 1 and 3, in fact, do rhyme. Notice we're talking about rhymes that occur at the ends of each of these lines. This is what we call, in fact, end rhyme, and it's a very common technique in especially English poetry, but not only English poetry. One of the ways you can describe the form of a poem, if it uses end rhyme, is to catalog where the same rhymes occur. The owl and the pussycat went to sea, I'd call that A. In a beautiful pea-green boat, B. They took some honey and plenty of money, A, because it rhymes up with line 1. Wrapped up in a 5-pound note, B, because it rhymes with line 2. So far I have A, B, A, B. If I keep going, the next line ending in above, C, guitar is D, my love, C, and then you are in both of the last two lines, D, D. We call this rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme of this stanza or set of lines, A, B, A, B. C, D, C, D, D. Some poetic forms are very strict about the kinds of rhyme, of end rhyme that occur. For example, a limerick would have a very strict pattern of end rhyme. End rhyme isn't the only way that you can find rhyme providing structure to a poem. In this case, look closely at line 3. They took some honey and plenty of money. Honey and money rhyme more obviously than money and sea. So our ears catch honey and money, but honey's in the middle of a line. We can call this internal rhyme. And sometimes these internal rhymes are a pleasure to hear, and they help unify the poem in a very subtle way. Here's another poem. It's an excerpt, actually. It's the second half of a poem by Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And in chapter 10 of this children's work, Alice is trying to recite poems that she's memorized for school to the Griffin and the Mock Turtle. But because she's in Wonderland and she's had kind of a rough day, growing larger and smaller and getting lost in this strange place, her poems never come out the way she expects. And so what is supposed to be a very dry, scholarly poem ends up being a strange poem, first about a lobster, and then, by the time we're looking at this excerpt, about another owl and a panther. I passed by his garden and saw with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish as his share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl as a boon was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received knife and fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet by... Now this poem isn't finished in the original work, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, because Alice is interrupted by the Mock Turtle, who says that this is just so much nonsense he can't even stand to listen to it. But notice how powerful rhyme is. In this case, the rhyme scheme of this poem is pretty straightforward. Every 2 lines have the same end rhyme: I, pie, meat, treat, boon, spoon. So by the time we get to growl, you're conditioned to finish this poem by suggesting that the banquet is ended by eating the owl. As a matter of fact, over the generations, many people have suggested other endings for this poem that don't all end with the owl being somebody's supper. But as a matter of fact, that's the power of end rhyme. When you look at works that do use the technique of rhyme, feel free to catalog their rhyme scheme in the way that we've done, by assigning them letters for the same rhymes. Sometimes you'll have to rely on not a true rhyme, but an assonance. An assonance would be 2 words that have the same vowel sound, but not the same consonant ending. So for example, the word treat would be an assonance with the word week. They both use the long E sound, but they don't both end in a T sound together. So an assonance is an almost rhyme, and sometimes poets substitute those almost rhymes into their rhyme scheme just because they needed a particular word and the rhyme word didn't quite work out.